The rain had been falling since dusk, a soft, endless whisper against the old hospital windows. The corridor lights flickered, pale and tired, casting long shadows across the cold floor. Sam sat by the bedside of Lee, her hands trembling as she tried to keep the blanket from slipping off his motionless body. He looked so still. Too still. Machines hummed quietly beside him, their green lights blinking in rhythm, the only proof that he was still alive. Every sound in that room was painfully clear: the rain, the wind, the faint beeping of the heart monitor, and the shallow breaths that escaped Lee's lips. Sam's eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale from exhaustion, her belly round and full now, moved gently as if the baby inside could feel her mother's fear. She reached down and whispered, voice cracking, "Daddy will wake up soon. He promised, remember." Her words floated into the silence, unanswered. Lee had been in a coma for almost 3 days. Ever since he was brought back from the border, injured, unconscious, his mission incomplete. The doctor said he might never wake up again. But Sam refused to believe it. She couldn't. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and leaned closer, brushing her fingers through his hair. "You've always kept your promises, Lee. You said you'd come back to me, to us." Her voice broke. The room smelled of disinfectant and rain, sharp, metallic, and lonely. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his arm, feeling the coldness of his skin seep into her own. Memories came like fragments of dreams, the sound of his laughter under the summer sun, the way he used to call her name when she was angry, the night he kissed her forehead before leaving for his mission. "I'll be back before you know it." But time had proven otherwise. The storm outside grew heavier, lightning flashing through the window, illuminating Lee's pale face for a brief second. Sam looked at him, her heart aching. She didn't care how long it took, she would stay. Even if it meant all night. Even if it meant forever. She placed her hand on his chest, right where his heart should be beating stronger, and whispered softly, "Lee, can you hear me? Please, come back to me. Come back to us." The wind howled, but Lee did not move. Still, she stayed. Because love, she believed, was stronger than pain, stronger than silence, stronger than fear. And somewhere, deep in the stillness, perhaps his heart heard her. The clock struck midnight. The hospital was silent, except for the rain and the hum of electricity running through the machines. The nurse had offered to let Sam rest in the waiting room, but she refused. She couldn't leave him, not even for a minute. Her hands were cold, but she still held Lee's. His skin felt lifeless. But every time she wanted to let go, she was terrified that doing so would make him slip further away. She whispered softly, as if speaking to the memory of him. "Do you remember, Lee, the day you taught me how to ride the old motorbike? You said I looked like a bird trying to fly for the first time." Her lips trembled into a faint smile before her eyes clouded again with tears. She spoke to him as though her voice could travel somewhere, through the walls, through the silence, into the place where his soul might still be wandering. Outside, thunder rolled. The lights flickered, and for a moment, Sam thought she saw his fingers twitch. She gasped, tightening her grip, but when she looked closely, his hand was still again. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe hope itself had started to play tricks on her heart. She stood up slowly and poured warm water into a cloth, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Her movements were gentle, trembling, like someone afraid to wake a sleeping child. "I'm here, Lee," she murmured. "I've been here every hour, every minute. You're not alone." Her baby shifted inside her, as though responding to her words. She placed her hand over her belly, feeling a faint kick. "You see, even our child is waiting for you," she said, her voice cracking. "We both need you, Lee." Tears slipped down her cheeks again. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was, not just from the sleepless nights, but from holding on to hope that was slowly breaking her. Still, she refused to let go. Through the glass window, the first signs of dawn began to color the stormy sky with a faint gray light. The rain softened, the air in the room changed, just a little, as if something unseen had stirred. Sam leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss on Lee's hand. "If you can hear me, please come back," she whispered one last time before resting her head beside him. Her breathing slowed, her eyes heavy with fatigue. The baby inside her moved gently, peacefully, as if feeling that something was about to happen. And as the rain finally stopped outside, the monitor beside the bed let out a sudden, sharp beep. Sam's eyes opened wide. Her heart skipped a beat. Lee's fingers moved, this time, undeniably. The hospital corridor was silent except for the distant echo of footsteps and the soft hum of machines. Inside the room, the faint light from the window touched Lee's pale face, outlining the tired features that once carried warmth and strength. Sam sat by his side, her hands still holding his. The weight of the night pressed upon her chest, but she didn't move. Her back ached, her eyelids burned, and her body trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from fear. She whispered softly, "Lee, please wake up. It's me," to Sam. Her voice broke. "You once promised to protect me, remember? You said no storm could ever tear us apart." Her words melted into tears. A small sob escaped her, followed by another. She leaned forward, resting her forehead on his hand. At that moment, the baby inside her stirred, as if responding to her pain. Sam placed her free hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement, her only reminder of hope and life continuing. Then suddenly, she felt a twitch. Lee's fingers moved slightly beneath her palm. Her heart stopped for a second. She lifted her head quickly, eyes wide, searching his face. "Lee," she called, almost afraid to believe. His eyelids fluttered weakly. A faint sound left his lips broken, uncertain. Sam." Her breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't speak. It was as if the entire world had gone silent, leaving only that fragile, trembling voice between them. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded repeatedly. "Yes, Lee, it's me, I'm here." His gaze was still blurry, confused, as if he were fighting through a fog of lost memories. But then, his eyes, those same eyes that once looked at her with warmth, seemed to soften. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Sam pressed his hand against her face, sobbing uncontrollably. "You remember me?" she asked in a trembling whisper. Lee's lips curved into the faintest, fragile smile. "I don't know everything," he said slowly, "but my heart, it remembers you." Sam broke down completely, her tears falling freely onto his hand. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the clouds, soft, warm, and golden. It was as if the night that had lasted too long finally surrendered to the morning. Inside that quiet hospital room, love, fragile, lost, but never gone, had just found its way back. The morning light slipped gently through the curtains, painting the room in a tender gold. Sam sat close to Lee's bedside, afraid that if she blinked, everything that just happened would disappear like a dream. His fingers were still weak in hers, but the warmth had returned, real, steady, alive. Lee looked at her with quiet confusion mixed with something deeper, something his mind couldn't explain, but his heart already knew. He touched her face clumsily, tracing the faint lines of exhaustion and love. "You've been crying," he murmured softly. Sam smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "I was afraid you'd never open your eyes again." He blinked slowly, as if trying to grasp the weight of her words. Then his gaze drifted lower to her slightly rounded belly, beneath the hospital gown. He stared for a long time, his lips parting in wonder. "You're pregnant." Tears filled her eyes again. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, and it's yours, Lee." The silence that followed was almost sacred. Lee's hand trembled as he reached toward her stomach, resting his palm gently against it. "Mine," he repeated, the word cracking like it carried both disbelief and awe. I don't remember much, but when I touch you, everything inside me feels right. Like, I've been waiting for this." Sam couldn't hold back anymore. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "You once told me love doesn't need to be remembered, it just needs to exist. Maybe that's what this is, Lee. Even when your memory was gone, Your heart, it never forgot me. Lee closed his eyes, his thumb brushing away her tears. Then I must have loved you deeply, he whispered. Because even in the dark, I still found my way back to you. The doctor quietly entered the room, smiled at the sight before him, and said, "It seems our patient finally remembered what truly matters." Then he left, leaving them in the golden stillness of morning. To Sam's tears turned into laughter, soft, trembling, beautiful. Lee pulled her closer, his weak arms wrapping around her as if afraid she might vanish again. She could feel his heart beating against hers, strong and certain. Outside, the world began to wake. Birds sang on the window ledge, and sunlight flooded the room like a blessing. For the first time in months, Sam felt peace bloom within her chest. Lee pressed his lips against her forehead and whispered, "I don't remember our story, but let's write it again together." Sam closed her eyes, smiling through her tears. "Yes, Lee, this time, we'll start from love that never left." And as the day rose over the hospital, two souls once lost in pain and time found each other again, proving that even when memories fade, true love remembers the way home. Love is not bound by time, memory, or circumstance. What Sam and Lee went through reminds us that true love does not live only in words or recollections. It resides quietly in the soul. When Lee lost his memory, the bond that once tied their hearts didn't vanish. It merely waited for the right moment to bloom again. His unconscious gestures, the way he held her hand, the way his heartbeat calmed when she was near, proved that real love goes beyond what the mind can recall. Sam's sleepless nights beside Lee's bed teach us about the strength of devotion. Even when hope seemed fragile, she chose to believe. She stayed, not because of a promise, but because of faith, the kind of faith that comes from loving someone deeply enough to wait, even in uncertainty. In her silence and patience, there was a beauty stronger than despair. She taught us that love is not always about dramatic confessions or grand gestures. Sometimes it is about staying quietly beside someone who can no longer remember you, and believing they will feel you anyway. Lee's awakening shows another truth. The heart remembers what the mind forgets. His first instinct after opening his eyes was to reach for Sam. He didn't know who she was, yet he felt peace in her presence. That moment reminds us that love leaves traces that no injury, no distance, and no loss of memory can erase. It lives in every heartbeat, in every touch, and in every quiet act of care we once gave and received. This story reminds us that real love is not about possession, it's about connection. It's about finding your way back to someone, even when you don't know the path. When everything else fades, names, places, moments, the feeling remains. Because love, the kind Sam and Lee shared, doesn't need to be remembered to be real. It simply is. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Love is not something the mind remembers. It is something the soul never forgets.